You're listening to the TJ Moore Podcast. Today's guest is Jodi Wilding from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. She helps people stop playing small by working with entrepreneurs and business owners to expand their capacity and step into the next chapter of their life and business, creating success from the inside out. She's a keynote speaker, business leadership mentor, mindset and manifestation coach, and adventure seeker. Jodi, thank you for joining me for today's conversation.
Thank you, TJ. It's great to be here with you.
So today we're going to get into several topics about creativity and trusting yourself. So I want to start here. How do you define intuition in your own life?
Intuition is, to me, just really being connected to yourself. For some of us, that it's that inner voice, that inner knowing, and just listening to that and listening and trusting that and following what is true for us, that true essence.
I've also related to this, heard intuition described as inner tuition, a teaching to yourself. And it's also associated with the topic of the higher self or the soul. There's so many ways to define it where we're listening to something that's outside of sort of the normal personality. It's more of what's in your best interest, whether you like it or not.
For some of it's for source, a higher power, the universe, or God, or our higher self, our true essence. There's different ways of looking at that. Intuition, to me, it is that quieter, usually that quieter, softer voice it's the guiding force, the one that we don't really listen to, the one that we question with the other more negative voice.
One of the clients that's worked with you, Sabrina, has written, if you're looking for something new in your life or already have an idea of where you're going but need support or guidance getting there, hop on this train with Jodi. I guarantee you will arrive back at your inner voice to guide you on your path. This is what I call soul work.
That gives me goosebumps hearing it. Thank you.
How would you describe the manifestation process when you're working with a client?
Manifestation is really just what we're thinking about and bringing it into reality, right? It's just what are we creating in our world? And I love to think of it too as like working on our magnet. Like when we become more magnetic, that's when we're going to manifest what we really want, and it's going to come easier and with like less effort. And things just flow. We're in flow and things flow to us. And when we're doing that, it is creating that deeper inner work. So we're really clear on our vision. Like, what is it that we truly want? Not what we think we should want, not what others want for us, but what is it that we truly want? And then aligning ourselves with that. So aligning our thoughts, aligning our beliefs and our actions. We're always manifesting though, right? So whatever you're thinking about, whether it's what you don't want, that's what you're going to manifest. So I want to help people manifest what it is they actually do want and really connect with that and bring that into their reality.
It is true that we can't really stop, just as we can't stop time. We can't stop our own aging or our own cellular development on the microbiology level. There's a speaker on this, Greg Braden. He talks about how when cells are studied on the micro level, there is no such thing as being static. Every single living organism is constantly in motion, in a dynamic, kinetic development of death and rebirth constantly. And he said, even when these cells are studied up close, they do emit tiny amounts of light. He talks about how cells are constantly dimming and brightening because they're constantly in death and rebirth. When you're working with clients, how do you help them get a more clear vision for what they want to do next?
Asking the right questions, but I think a big part of it is even just providing that space for people to slow down and to reconnect with themselves, because many of us were kind of in this autopilot and running through our days and just, how much can I do? How much can I check off my list? And thinking about multitasking and productivity and listening to more things and doing more things, that it's just really creating that space and just getting curious about them and asking them the questions. And I've always loved asking questions. I've always been really curious. And so it it works. And I love the deep dives with people and just, we don't often have that time and space to really just focus on ourselves. And so I think that's a big part of it.
And so when they do this more inner work and reflection with you, I just want to say that sometimes it might be the first time in a long time that they've had anyone actually give them that space and ask those questions. And when people make like a vision board, we're familiar with that, where you're trying to get something to be more visual out of your imagination and onto paper. I think what's going on there is people are looking for some way to see a reflection of what's going on internally, which can be very mysterious. And it's not until they do journaling or speaking with someone or doing some sort of visual exercise that they start to get those things to where they can actually see them and say, okay, now that I see part of my vision, what are some steps I can take to get closer and close the gap?
And it's such a good point, because some people, when you ask them, right, because many of us too, especially when they start coming to me, they've really suppressed their wants and their needs. And so they don't know. And I was at that point too in my life. But for some too, it is those visuals of like, I can look through a magazine and I see this. I don't know, but I'm just attracted to it. I don't know why, but I'm attracted to this image. And so as you start putting those pieces together, then the vision comes clearer. Another thing too, I do love the writing, like just free flow, subconscious writing. But I also love doing visualizations for people. And when I was on a recent retreat, the one that I co-hosted recently, I began with visualization. And you're right, many people haven't had this time or space to do this work. And so it was really interesting, just the insights and the realizations and the images and the awareness that came for people just in like I think it was like a 5 or 7 minute visualization that I walked them through. And then I had them write. So you're just relaxed, you're just in your body. And then I'd have them write immediately after that, just that free flow writing. And so I think that's a really powerful exercise as well.
There's a lot of surprise that can happen where they're like, oh, I didn't realize that I was actually making these choices because I secretly want to get to this result. Someone I listen to, Esther Hicks, she talks a lot about the only reason you do anything is because you believe you will feel better in the having of that experience, that object, that person, that lifestyle. You're going for the emotional payoff.
Yeah. And so that's usually how I start, right? Is how is it that you want to feel? And you begin there. And then you kind of reverse engineer that. And in my experience, and I see this with a lot of people, it's like, well, I've done all of these things. I have the accolades, I have the achievements, I have the success, I have the money, but it doesn't feel how I thought it would. So it's like, okay, well, how do you want to feel? And then you work backwards of like, okay, now let's create that. Feeling that state now. And then that's also you're a magnet, because then you're going to start attracting that stuff because you are that, right? It's not wanting or needing to get to some place, but you already are that. So that's a big, important piece of it.
There's a concept that I've learned with this where you don't actually attract what you want. You usually attract who you are. And
Exactly.
we know this is true with networking, where they say, well, how come they won't get back to me? Or how come I can't get this opportunity? Well, for some reason, you're not aware that what you're presenting is not matching their expectation of that exchange. And the example I almost always use for this is there are people who do public speaking who get paid $500 for an hour. And then there are those who get paid minimum, their fee to show up is $100,000. Or if you're an actor who's world famous, it's $1 million. You want them there for one day of the film shoot, their minimum is $1 million. Why is that? They have defined part of their own identity with their own value system that this is the dollar amount that matches what I'm bringing, and I'm only going to be saying yes to opportunities that are matching with that value level.
And that's what is so important and why I love working with business owners too, because you really are your business. And so if you don't have this identity or these beliefs about yourself, or even just that vision, then it's easy to go off on just a different way. And you're not going to attract the clients. You're going to feel like I'm chasing, and this is hard because you're not in alignment with your vision and what you really want and who you are.
When a car is driving at 20 miles an hour and one of the wheels is off alignment, you don't notice it that much because there's some wobble, but the faster you go, even if it's the alignment's off a little bit, the car could literally roll over. Mm-hmm. So that's how I think about this with momentum, is once you start getting momentum on a topic in life, the more out of alignment you are, the more wobble you're going to be experiencing with that.
Absolutely. Yes. I know Tony Robbins often talks about that too, the wheel, right? And the wheel of life. And if you think about that too, of like a fulfilling and whole life, all pieces are relatively like in balance, right? And if you're so focused on business or success and then other areas are being fully neglected, right? Then you're really going to have that wobble. You're just not going to get to where you want to go as fast or as smoothly.
It's like a pie almost. We're used to seeing pie charts. Yeah. Someone's like, oh my gosh, this area of my life, I don't have a relationship. But then their friends are like, okay, but you have all the other slices of, you have your family life, you have financial life, there's so many areas of life, but they're only focusing on the one that they're lacking in. So that's what they're feeling. They're missing out on that slice, but it's obvious to everyone around them what other slices are actually abundant already.
Yeah. It's so beautiful.
You have a phrase that you use called turning purpose into prosperity. Mm-hmm. And you've written about being magnetic. So I want to ask you, how does that magnetism idea connect to our own sense of identity?
When we are clear on our purpose and our why, that's really true to us, and we're showing up authentically, that is when we are our most magnetic self. And I can feel it. There are times when I'm not, and when my thoughts and my beliefs are not in alignment, I'm not as magnetic. And I can actually see things repelling, like I am repelling it. And so then it's always like, okay, well, I got to go in and I got to really just connect again. Like, what is it? What is my purpose? What is my why? Why am I doing this? What is my identity? Like, how do I align with the person, the version that I know I can be? And that always goes back to, like you said, the feeling, thoughts, beliefs. And then that informs our actions. And then that's when we are living that, right? When we're living our purpose and we're in our authenticity, and that's when we're the most magnetic, and that will lead to prosperity and abundance and that rich life. And I'm not talking like just financial, but love, abundance, joy, fulfillment, connection, like, just that really fulfilling, abundant life that I think we all want. Yes, there's the money part, but not at the sake of everything else.
So Lisa Nichols actually talks about 360 abundance, this idea that we think it's related to monetary wealth only, but some of the wealthiest people in the world they don't have the best relationships with their family or their friends, or they don't have necessarily the balance until they might reach a turning point in their life. Some people call it a midlife crisis, where they realize something has to change because my value systems are not giving to me what I want. This idea of magnetism is not just sort of a spiritual concept. It's actually also a physical truth. Science studies have revealed that the human body naturally generates its own biomagnetic field, primarily produced by tiny electrical currents flowing through our nerve cells, our brain, our heart. And people who study breath work, they actually understand that the energy systems of the body, which a lot of people use the word chakras, this interaction of the energy systems, especially with the brain and the heart, when they're in sync and when you get into deep breathing, it's called coherence.
The mind and heart coherence, which I think many of us are just disconnected right? We live in our head, and we need to live more from our hearts.
Why do you think so many people feel such a big disconnect with their own creativity?
One, I think that we don't realize, and this was true in my case, was I looked at artists, painters, musicians. I'm like, they're creative and I'm not. But what I've realized is that we are all creative and we are all creating all of the time, right? We're creating our life, but we don't realize that, and we don't take that responsibility, I guess. And then I also think too, is that many of us are disconnected from that because we are concerned about the shoulds, the expectations, the societal programming. We're focused on those things and the external rather than the internal. And we don't allow that creativity. We don't give ourselves that space to breathe and to create and to even just imagine, right? And to play like we did when we were kids. Like kids, they're so creative and so imaginative. And we lose that as we get older, but it's returning to that. And how can we create that time and space to do that? Because we are. And once you start to open that floodgates, then, right, the creativity just comes pouring out of you.
My friend tries to remind me to go back to childlike wonder, because we all have experienced that. Nobody came into their life experience as a teenager or a full-grown adult. Everyone started as a child, and we all perceived and viewed and interacted with the world in a very different way, a playful way. And so connected to this idea that we're talking about with creativity, it can happen where people start arguing for their own limitation.
Yes.
And they
Yes.
say, I can't do that I can't reach where I want to reach because of this attribute in my demographic, in my skin tone, in my belief system. But then you can look at anybody in history, including those who have something that they're missing, such as vision or hearing. Even Helen Keller was able to write many, many books once she got some tools and a way to express herself. She basically decided at one point, I'm no longer going to be defined by what they say is a limitation anymore.
And that's a big part of it. And the language that we use and how we define ourselves, like I am not creative or I'm not this, right? It impacts us and it limits us. It puts us in this little box or this circle, and everything we want, right? That fulfillment, that meaning, that prosperity, that abundance, like it's all outside of that circle, and it's expanding that identity of ourselves and what is possible for ourselves, and questioning those beliefs and how we're talking about ourselves, right? Is so important. And I think the other piece too of why people are disconnected is like stress. When we are feeling stressed or anxious or worried about the future or feeling that heaviness, it's hard to create from that place. We need that light, fun, playful energy. And I often hear this from clients and even myself. My best ideas come when I'm either running or walking or doing something like some sort of movement or something fun. Then I get all sorts of ideas and creativity, right? But we don't allow that for ourselves. We're more constricted and forcing, and you can't force it. It's something that you have to really just expand and allow.
The researcher and author Brené Brown uses the term, the story I'm telling myself. That's really helped me because we all have an inner dialogue. Sometimes it's a lot of worry and anxiety. Sometimes it's very hopeful. It can help to just become aware of what is the story, because usually those limitations, they're self-imposed, or maybe they came from a parent or someone in our environment, a boss who gave us a label, and then we started living in that box. People use the term the comfort zone, but really when you're trying to connect with sort of your on the soul level, it's not as much about comfort. It's more about self-expression, and creativity has so many ways. It's not just painting, like you were saying, or the ones that are really obvious. We think, oh, that person's creative or they're not creative. But even those labels are so limiting.
We get to choose, right? Yes, we have these stories, but the awareness is everything, right? Having that awareness, questioning the story. Where does this come from? Is this really true? And then what do we want? What do we want to create from here? And I often ask that with my clients, and they're feeling stuck in something or they're having an issue. It's like, okay, well, what would you love? What do you want to create right now?
What does that actually look like in real life to improve our own capacity with our own nervous system and emotions?
One, maybe taking it slowly, like slow little, I often call them turtle steps, to slowly expand and just have your body know like it is safe, right? And doing things that calm, like being out in nature is really good. Breath work. You've talked about breath work. I love yin yoga for that as well. Anything that you can do to just really calm your body. And then again, taking those slow steps to expand your capacity. Because if you have this big goal and you don't really believe it, or you're not ready to receive it, then you will start to sabotage it along the way.
What can happen to somebody if they try to expand or scale too fast beyond their own capacity in, let's say, their own business, for example?
You can grow really big, but it's how are you doing it and what is the context that you're doing it? Because there's quantum leaps. I'm sure, have you ever heard of quantum leaps,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that is all possible, but you have to be ready to receive on the other side of the quantum leap.
We're familiar where people say, I'm burnt out, or I can't handle this anymore. They start getting really overwhelmed. So I want to ask you, how does that connect to their nervous system? If they're scaling too fast in something in their life or business, how can that change drastically when their own capacity to handle it is no longer useful?
When it comes to burnout, I think there's two different things. So it's important if you are one, chasing the right goal, right? Because if we're chasing the wrong goal and we're not in alignment with it, and it's not true to us, that leads to exhaustion. And that can lead to burnout, right? Because we're more performing and it's not really true to us. Because you can, if you're really excited about what you're doing, it's a very different feeling and a very different energy. And if you're the motivation behind it, if it's really, connected to your why and to your purpose and you're in alignment.
So I have a friend who's a transformational coach, and we often talk about the idea of integrity. And we came up with the concept that integrity can mean all the parts of your thoughts, your actions, your personality, they're being combined, they're integrated. So integrity and integration are sort of the same concept. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you, because so many people have different goals, how can you help them define what success means for them?
That's it, right? You really do need to define what success is to you. And that is, okay, what is the life that you want to be living? What does that look like at the end, right? What is the legacy? And at the end of your life that you're looking back and saying like, I didn't have any regrets. I lived fully. I expressed myself fully. I knew who I was. I lived a life that was based on the values that I have and what's important to me, and create success there. So it's often looking at that future. And then I love, okay, like let's reverse engineer that and looking at, okay, well, how do I want to feel? How do I want to feel, when I'm 50, 60, 70, 80, how do I want to feel when I'm looking back on my life?
What are some of the invisible blocks that keep people from expressing themselves with their own creativity?
Reasons why people shrink themselves or play small in their life is, again, stories that they're telling themselves based on childhood experiences, things that their teachers or their family or whatever happened, up until wherever they are in their life. And the fear, right? It does take courage. I think one of the boldest things that you can do is really be authentic. I like to think of it as living out your wild, of just really being true to yourself authentically and expressing that in the world, and, you know, and showing everybody that, and making decisions that are right and true for you, even if everyone around you is not doing that.
There's a term in your coaching that you use called protective patterns. So can you just help define what that means for people who might not know what protective patterns are?
Those patterns that, again, keep us safe and small. As humans, we do love to be comfortable. We don't want to do the uncomfortable things. And so if we have this goal, and it's a stretch goal, right? Like it's something that's a little scary that we have to lean into, we might step back into some protective patterns that keep us safe, that keep us small, that keep us comfortable. Like a really great example is at the beginning of this call, we were talking about a YouTube channel, and that's one of the things that I want to do. And that's my next level of really expressing myself, but it's an edge for me. Patterns that come up are preparation, right? I over prepare and I get into that busy state of like, you know, I have to do this, or this has to be just right. And anything that will actually keep me from doing the thing.
So this concept makes me think of Joan Rivers. She had a documentary made about her called A Piece of Work. They said, "You're so experienced, Joan. There's no way that you're afraid of anything anymore, public speaking or traveling or doing shows for the Queen or whatever." And she said, "Do you know what fear feels like to me?" And she got out her calendar and she pulled up a blank month. And she said, "This is what fear is to me, is not being busy, not keeping myself distracted."
You can do the mindset work, right? And you can feel like you're making progress, but on a subconscious level, if you don't really truly believe that, and that's why affirmations don't always work, because again, you're just reaffirming something on your subconscious level that doesn't believe, and you're calling like BS on that.
Totally.
Right. And so it is. And that's what, yeah, it's sneaky. And so it really is that awareness. And if we're busy, like rushing through our day and not really taking the time for that awareness and for that deep work, then we can't break the pattern. We can't break or change what we have zero awareness on.
It can come out as tough love from others, friends or family, coworkers, because it's usually more obvious to them what we're avoiding and the ways that we're making ourselves busy to keep avoiding that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you do private coaching one-on-one as transformation work. And one of your clients, Lindsay G, has written, "Working with Jodi was a game changer, both for my business and personal alignment. Jodi helped me turn overwhelm into purpose and reminded me that success doesn't have to come at the cost of joy." You are creating and starting, it's called the Expansion Studio. It's a community for entrepreneurs doing their inner work. So you're going to be covering mindset, identity, nervous system regulation. And inside the program, there's going to be weekly live group sessions. And part of your intention with this is to support people with like-minded, others who understand where they are on their journey. So what inspired you to start creating this live community?
Well, again, I do really think that people need this space to do the work, to do the stuff that we often like just push off, because I know how important it is and how it can change your life and business. And so one, I wanted to create this space. And two, I think there's so much that we learn from having a community of people who are on that same journey of expanding and shifting their identities. And we don't always have that in our personal life, right? We might not have people that understand, and that can feel very lonely. And then they might view us as an old version. And so it's hard to change and to grow into that version you can be, but maybe are being sort of pulled back in your everyday. And so having this container of people who are doing it and see you for that version of you and help you grow into that, I think is really powerful in my experience. And so I want to create that space. And I love the idea of a studio, because it's one of those places where it's like, okay, I get to play, I get to create this identity and this vision that I want for my life and practice it until that's who I am.
When I interviewed Ariana Monell, she described this feeling as there's a lot of times where people aren't even aware that they're not doing the next step in their life because they're afraid of the person who saw the older version, as you mentioned. So it's that version of the person from high school, the person from before you were in a relationship, whatever stage of life you were in, they're currently defining how that person views them from that lens, which could have been 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter because our emotional relationship to the person we feel judged by, it can almost be like held in time in the way we felt it the strongest.
Well, and that's it, because it goes back to that emotion and that feeling, and it's whatever we experience with really intense emotion, whether positive or negative, that's what gets imprinted into our subconscious. And that's what we need to reprogram, right? Is that, and it's with that same level of emotion and feeling that is going to shift that.
One of the ways that people can connect with you directly is to set up a clarity call and get on your schedule at jodiwilding.com. And it's also super easy to find Jodi on LinkedIn and Instagram. Just search Jodi Wilding. And you also host retreats and events. So do you have anything coming up as far as retreats or trips go?
I do. We don't have dates yet, but I do have some things coming up. One that will be more local here in Ottawa, and then another international one for 2027 that I'm excited about. Thank you for having me on. It was a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. I really had a great time. The terms that you teach in your coaching, I think, are really memorable, and they help people connect with it in a way that they've never heard it said before.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you.
To hear more experts share their story, subscribe to the TJ Moore podcast on YouTube and follow this show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to listen anywhere you go. Like and comment on this video if you found today's conversation valuable, and share this episode with someone in your life. I'll see you next week.